I've always been the kind of person who knew how to put on a show, smiling at the right times, making small talk about gardening and recipes, pretending that everything was fine even when the world was crumbling around me. After all, I was Laura Parker, the woman everyone in our quiet Indianapolis suburb looked up to. My house was immaculate, my family was enviable, and my smile was as polished as the silverware I brought out for special OC, but that night it was a humid Thursday evening in July, and we were all gathered in my dining room for dinner. Frank was talking baseball stats with Logan, his voice echoing through the room. Hannah was sipping her wine, half listening but mostly scrolling through her phone. I sat at the head of the table, watching them, feeling like a ghost in my own life. And then, Logan looked at me. It wasn't a long look, just a flicker of acknowledgement, a barely there smile as he reached for his glass of water. But it was enough to send my heart racing. I quickly looked away, pretending to adjust the napkin on my lap. Hannah didn't notice. Or maybe she did. I couldn't tell anymore. "Mom," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice had that edge she got when she was annoyed. "Didn't you say you wanted to take Logan up on his offer to help with the ifros?" "Oh," I said, trying to sound casual. "Yes, but there's no rush. It can wait." "I don't mind," Logan chimed in, his voice smooth as ever. "I could stop by Tea Perfect," Hannah said, her smile tight. "Maybe I'll come by, too. I haven't seen the backyard since you put in the new hydrangeas." There it was. That knowing tone. That subtle accusation wrapped in politeness. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, forcing a laugh. "You should come see them. They're blooming beautifully." The rest of the meal passed in a blur of forced conversation. I couldn't focus on anything except the knot tightening in my stomach. By the time we cleared the plates, my nerves were shot. Later that night, I stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing a dish that was already clean. The house was quiet. Frank had gone to bed, and Hannah and Logan had left. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional chirp of a cricket outside. And then the front door opened. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat, to see Logan standing there. "Forgot my phone," he said, holding up his car keys as if to justify his presence. I nodded, trying to ignore the way my hands were trembling. "It's probably in the living room." He crossed the kitchen, his footsteps soft on the tiled floor. I felt him pause behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body. "Laura," he said, his voice low. I turned to face him, and for a moment, we just stood there, the tension between us so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "This has to stop," I whispered, though my voice betrayed me with its unsteadiness. "I know," he said, but he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We both knew what he meant. Before I could respond, a voice shattered the silence. "Logan?" We both turned to see Hannah standing in the doorway, her purse slung over her shoulder and her eyes wide with confusion and something else. "I thought you were in the car," she said, her gaze darting between us. I was," Logan stammered. "I just came back from my phone." Hannah's eyes narrowed. "And you needed to have a heart-to-heart with my mother to find it?" The room seemed to shrink. My mind raced, searching for an explanation, a way out of this moment. "Hannah, don't be ridiculous," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "Logan was just thanking me for dinner." "Right," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Logan moved toward the living room, muttering something about his phone, and I followed Hannah to the porch, desperate to salvage the situation. "Hannah, wait," I said as she opened her car door. She stopped and turned to face me. "What the hell is going on, Mom?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "You're overthinking this." She shook her head, her expression a mix of disbelief and hurt. "You think I'm blind? I've seen the way you two act around each other. The way you laugh at his jokes, the way he looks at you." "Hannah, stop," I said, my voice trembling. "Why?" she demanded. "So you can keep lying to me?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. "Unbelievable," she muttered, climbing into her car and slamming the door. I watched her taillights disappear down the street, my heart pounding as I tried to catch my breath. When I turned back toward the house, Logan was standing in the doorway, his phone in hand. "What now?" he asked softly. I didn't have an answer. I stayed up that night, sitting on the porch and watching the stars. The air was cool, and the cicadas had finally gone quiet, leaving an eerie stillness in their wake. When Frank came out to check on me, I told him I couldn't sleep. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and went back inside, oblivious as always. But I knew sleep wouldn't come. Not that night. Not for a long time. Because Hannah knew. And it was only a matter of time before the whole fragile house of cards came crashing down. I didn't hear from Hannah for 2 days after that night. 2 days of agonizing silence where my mind raced through 1,000 worst-case scenarios. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, only to find a harmless notification or a spam call. I knew her silence wasn't accidental. It was calculated. On the 3rd day, she called. "Mom," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "We need to talk. I'll come over tonight." Around 7. I barely managed a response before she hung up. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, certainly not on Frank, who spent the morning grumbling about a blown call in last night's baseball game. By mid-afternoon, I'd scrubbed every surface in the house twice, rearranged the pantry, and reheated a pot of soup I wasn't even hungry for. At 6:30, Logan called. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice tight. "Hannah's been giving me the cold shoulder all week. She knows, Laura. Do you think I don't know that?" I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. He sighed. "I'm coming over. We should face this together." "No," I said quickly. "Don't. She'll be here any minute. If you show up now, it'll only make things worse." There was a long pause. "Okay," he said finally. "But if she asks me directly, I'm not lying to her. Not anymore." I didn't respond. By 7, the house was immaculate, every cushion fluffed and every surface gleaming. Frank had mercifully gone out to his weekly poker game, leaving the house to me and Hannah. When she arrived, her knock was sharp, businesslike. She stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her, her posture stiff, her eyes cold. "We're not doing small talk," she said as she dropped her purse on the kitchen counter. "I want the truth." "Hannah, please." "No." She cut me off. "I'm done being lied to, Mom. Did something happen between you and Logan?" Her question hung in the air like smoke. I opened my mouth to deny it, to salvage what little I could, but the words caught in my throat. "Hannah, you what?" she snapped. "You didn't think I'd notice? You didn't think I'd figure out that my own mother has been involved with my husband?" Her voice cracked, and I saw tears welling in her eyes. That broke me. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." She stared at me, her jaw tightening as the tears spilled down her cheeks. "How could you do this to me? How could you betray me like this?" "I'm sorry," I said, my own tears falling now. "Hannah, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. Stop calling it a mistake," she shouted, her voice echoing through the house. "A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday or burning the roast. This was a choice, Mom. A choice you made over and over again." I didn't know what to say. How do you defend the indefensible? The confrontation lasted for hours, cycling through every stage of grief. Anger, disbelief, hurt. Hannah threw everything she had at me, and I took it because I deserved it. By the time Frank came home, the house was silent. Hannah was sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkened street, her face pale and tear-streaked. "What's going on?" Frank asked, glancing between us. "Ask her," Hannah said, her voice hollow. Frank turned to me, his brows furrowing. "Laura?" I wanted to lie. God, I wanted to lie. But I couldn't do it anymore. "It's about Logan," I said, my voice trembling. "Hannah thinks there's something going on between us." Frank blinked, his confusion giving way to a slow, dawning horror. "Is there?" I couldn't look at him. "Frank, please," "Oh my God," he whispered, stepping back as if I'd struck him. "It's true, isn't it?" Before I could respond, Hannah stood and grabbed her purse. "I can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't be here." She brushed past Frank, her shoulder bumping his as she stormed out the door. "Hannah, wait." I called after her, but the slam of her car door was her only response. Frank turned to me, his face a mask of betrayal. "How long?" "Frank, how long, Laura?" he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I just didn't have the courage to give him one. The fallout spread quickly. By the next morning, the entire family knew. My eldest daughter, Claire, called me in tears, demanding an explanation. Frank packed a bag and left, saying he needed time to think. And Logan? He showed up at my door that evening, his face pale and his eyes hollow. "Hannah left me," he said. I stared at him, my heart sinking. "Where did she go?" "She wouldn't tell me," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Laura, what do we do now?" I didn't have an answer for that either, because at that moment, I realized we'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. We'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, and the life I'd spent 65 years building had come crashing down around me. The week after Hannah left felt like a slow-motion collapse, every hour dragging by as the cracks in my life grew wider and more devastating. Frank hadn't returned, and the silence in the house was deafening. I spent my days pacing the rooms, haunted by the echoes of the life I'd once known. Hannah was unreachable. She'd ignored my calls, my texts, and even my emails. When Claire finally got through to her, the message she relayed was simple. "She doesn't want to hear from you, Mom." Logan, meanwhile, was unraveling. He moved into a dingy motel off the highway, and when he wasn't calling me in a panic, he was showing up at my doorstep unannounced. The confident, charismatic man I once knew was gone, replaced by someone brittle and desperate. "We can fix this," he said one night, standing in my kitchen with a bottle of whiskey in his hand. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice slurred. "We'll tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. They'll believe us." I shook my head, exhaustion weighing me down like an anchor. "Logan, it's over. You need to focus on fixing things with Hannah." He laughed bitterly. "You think she'll ever forgive me? She's done with me, Laura, just like Frank's done with you." The words hit like a slap, but I couldn't deny their truth. Days later, the storm finally broke. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was sitting on the porch, staring out at the neighborhood I'd called home for decades. The air was thick with the smell of rain, the kind of humidity that promised a downpour. Then I saw Hannah's car pull into the driveway. She stepped out, her face unreadable, and walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps. My heart pounded as I stood to greet her. "Hannah, don't," she said, holding up a hand. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp, cutting through me like glass. She sat down on the porch swing, motioning for me to join her. I hesitated but obeyed, sitting on the edge of the cushion as if it might collapse beneath me. "I've been thinking," she said after a long silence, "about everything. About you. About Logan. About what happens next." I swallowed hard. "Hannah, let me finish," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know, I always thought you were invincible. This perfect woman who had everything figured out. Even when Dad started pulling away, even when you were lonely, I thought you were strong enough to handle it. But now I see you're just human." Her voice broke on the last word, and she wiped at her eyes quickly. "I loved him, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought he was my forever. And then to find out he was yours, too." "Hannah, it wasn't like that," I said, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," she said sharply, her eyes locking onto mine. "And you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed our family. Dad's gone. Logan's a mess. Claire doesn't even want to talk to you. Do you even understand what you've done?" Her words cut deeper than any accusation ever had. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I'll regret this for the rest of my life." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You should." She stood, brushing off her jeans, and looked down at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "I came here to tell you I'm leaving," she said. "Leaving?" I echoed, my stomach dropping. "I'm moving to Chicago," she said. "I got a transfer at work. I need to get out of here. Start over somewhere new." The finality of her words hit me like a freight train. "Hannah, please don't go," I said, my voice breaking. "We can fix this. We can—" "No, Mom," she said firmly. "You can't fix this. Not this time." She turned and walked back to her car, leaving me sitting there, frozen in place. The next few weeks passed in a blur of pain and regret. Hannah moved to Chicago, cutting off all contact. Frank filed for divorce, and Claire made it clear she was siding with him. Logan disappeared entirely, leaving nothing but a short, apologetic note on my doorstep. "Laura, I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find peace someday. Take care of yourself." I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat in the garden Logan had once helped me tend. The marigolds were blooming, their vibrant colors a cruel reminder of the joy that had once filled this space. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Frank standing there, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hi," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked around the garden, his gaze lingering on the flowers. "You've always had a knack for this, making things beautiful." "Thank you," I said, unsure where this was going. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not here to yell or rehash everything. I wanted to say goodbye properly." Tears welled in my eyes, but I managed to nod. "Goodbye, Frank." He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed my forehead. "Take care of yourself, Laura." And then he was gone. As the garden fell silent once more, I realized this was the ending I had earned. Not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, devastating collapse. I was left with the consequences of my choices and the undeniable truth. Some mistakes can't be undone, and some bridges can never be rebuilt.